I'd like to welcome our audience today to MasterMinds, Lessons in Leadership. And we're very pleased to have with us Danny Queenan of CBRE. And as most of you know, the concept behind MasterMinds is that rare intersection of leadership and strategy, which is what makes great leaders great. And Danny, thank you for joining us. Appreciate you taking the time. Why don't we open up maybe for those people who don't know CB as well as you and I do, maybe just an overview of the company and your current role in the company. That'd be helpful to start.
Sure. Well, first of all, Bill, thanks for having me. You and I have known each other a long time, but I appreciate being invited. So this is an honor for me. CBRE is a company that is built to service, investor and occupier demands. Consider ourselves a market leader for sure. There are three segments of CBRE, and I'll break them down for you. The first one is our advisory segment, and the advisory segment is what many of you would know as where our brokers sit. So it's brokers, both tenant representation and agency leasing. It's our capital markets group, so investment sale brokers, including debt and structured finance. It's property management, it's valuations. That's the advisory segment, predominantly what CBRE has been known for, for years and years. The second segment has really been coming on strong, especially as CBRE has looked to diversify its revenue base, over the last few years and really concentrate on annuity revenue or revenue that's based on long-term contracts. That's our global workplace solutions segment. And so that's outsourcing of things such as project management, transaction management, facilities management for occupiers. And so that's been a huge and growing business for CBRE. And the third segment is real estate investments. And that is the segment of CBRE that I have the privilege and honor of being responsible for. It's comprised of two things. One is Trammell Crow Company, which is our development company, and the second is CBRE Investment Management, the investment management portion. Trammell Crow Company is approximately 27 or 28 billion of in-process and pipeline development work. And CBRE Investment Management is roughly 150 billion in assets under management. The REI segment is where the company uses balance sheet to make investments. So on the development side, we're investing as a GP co-investor in development deals. And in the investment management business, we're using balance sheet to invest in funds. And so the CBRE uses balance sheet to invest in REI. The only other places it's making investments would be things like share repurchases, M&A, or recruitment or retention of brokerage teams, et cetera. That's the general layout and how I fit in.
Danny, let's segue back into the macroeconomic environment. I mean, you are obviously running a global business. And I would say in my 40 years of experience in a lot of the CEO succession work I do today, I've never had more candidates say that running a global company, a public company, was not of as much interest as it used to be, 10, 15 years ago. And when you listen to them, it's all about the volatility. It's all about the uncertainty. It's all about, quite honestly, the transparency. There are just a lot of things that have gone on over the last 3 to 5 years that have been very unsettling for leaders. And I'm just curious to get your view of, what's going on in the geopolitical world, the economic world, and how you are, addressing all these issues and running the business.
Yeah. Oh, I'm right there with the others that you've spoken to. And I think it's hard to point to a silver bullet right now. I think a lot of people say that it's a weird environment and it's difficult to figure out. It won't be surprising to you, Bill. I think we're all feeling and reading some of the same things, but we're believing that there'll be one, if not two, Fed hikes, coming in the second half of the year, and those will need to happen to continue the fight against inflation. And therefore, some of the energy that people were hoping for with market activity coming back in the second half is likely, out into 2024, when hopefully we see some rate decreases that causes some stability and some more clarity. It's interesting to see, that seems like some momentum's being lost in Europe right now, for a number of different reasons. The war is certainly not helping. Asia Pacific's hitting some headwinds as well, and China in particular at the moment. We've all read about that. In the U.S., we're trying to figure out what's going on, because it seems like the manufacturing sector is more close to a recession, whereas the services sector is hanging in there and propping up the economy. So we're hopeful in this, in the hope for a soft landing and a continued good fight against inflation, so we can get back at it, in 2024. I also think there's a lot of dynamics going on with the way that investors are thinking about the business, but maybe even more importantly, what's going to happen with occupiers. From an investor standpoint, you know all the issues, but when will there be clarity? When will you, for instance, in the Trammell Crow business, a lot of our investors right now, a lot of our capital partners, it's hard right now to put capital stacks together. And on the equity side, they're looking at what an untrended, rent yield is. And it's hard to point, to what that is. And they're looking at that against what they could go do with an income producing asset that's already been built versus doing nothing. And getting people off the dime right now is very difficult. So everyone's looking for what will be that moment in time. And maybe it will be an interest rate decrease. What will be the moment in time where we get back at it and all of a sudden we have some interest rates that we can rely on? It sets in stone some cap rates or some comps anyway. And we get back to really believing that we know what the spreads are going to be like. I think that's going to take some time, but I hope it starts next year. But on the occupier side, I think it's perhaps even more peculiar. There's just a lot going on right now out there. You have the work from home dynamic, and how often will people come back? What percentage of the people, what percentage of the time, what kind of a building are they going to want to be in? And how much remote work continues, all the issues that you and I have read about. But it's not just work for home and office. I think you also have a lot of logistics occupiers that need really modern buildings that are thinking about the way that they're gonna live in those spaces. Retailers, the bricks versus e-commerce, and how will that continue? And then on the multifamily sector, how long will a high interest rate environment push people to want to rent versus own homes? And that differs, in the US versus Europe versus Asia Pacific. So all of this is going on. We're watching it all so closely, and we're trying to, build all of this into an investment thesis, but both for investors and the way that we're going to advise occupiers. How does this change the way that I look at the business or we think about it? Offensively, we're trying to really concentrate hard on data, especially proprietary data that we have within our own portfolios, and lean on that more and more to make good investment decisions, and to use that as a way to differentiate against our competitors with our investment theses, to try and be as opportunistic as possible. Defensively, it won't surprise you either. Smart balance sheet usage, staying away from recourse debt exposure, being smart with clients' money, even though we have the capital to deploy, be smart about the way we're deploying it. And if that means less dispositions and less acquisitions in a given year, maybe that's the smart play, at the moment, to hang on to the AUM and to make clients happy and to have good relative performance. And we're paying a lot of attention to diversifying our portfolios, diversifying the revenue mix, and cost management. So it's all those things.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people, Danny, have used the word agility in times of uncertainty. And I would argue, it's so funny. Before COVID, I remember telling somebody that I'd seen just about everything. Well, obviously, I hadn't, for sure. And people talk about having an agile organization that can respond in times of uncertainty. Easy to say, hard to do. I don't know if you all have talked about that concept and how how you've addressed that, if at all.
Well, it's a great word, and I'm going to steal it. But I think it's appropriate. We're trying to get better and better at this every day, and I think we've made some real improvements to become more agile. And some notable things that came to mind when you were just saying that. But I think we've made our investment committee processes more agile so that they can meet quicker and maybe with less information, but more quality and up-to-date information, which again gets back to data and the way that we're utilizing research.
Right.
I also think that we're on top of it right now with our balance sheet potential. And so using balance sheet to close on land where we might have a stressed or a distressed owner that wouldn't mind closing in 15 days as opposing to us extending an option and kicking the can down the road. We're trying to pounce on those kinds of opportunities. As a GP co-investor, maybe considering some options to be a GP co-investor at a greater percentage and using that with the way that we leverage our negotiations with some of our capital partners. We're absolutely trying to be more agile. And operationally, I think we've gotten better and better every single year with the way that we look at our business and the way that we are really on top of costs so that we can make decisions quickly. So I agree with you.
Tell the audience a little bit about, maybe one or two of your greatest leadership lessons. And I'm interested to know, who your mentors might have been and what kind of impact they had on your life.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll start with the mentor piece, and then I'll throw out a couple of lessons learned or the things that I think have really helped me think about leadership. But a couple of mentors, Bob Selenick has been a mentor. You know him well. You know a lot about him. But in terms of those leadership characteristics, again, the fairness, the consistency, being hard at times, but hard in a fair and consistent way, transparency, predictability, these kinds of leadership traits. He's also phenomenal at, he wouldn't ask someone to do something that he wouldn't do himself. That whole do unto others or treat others the way you'd want to be treated is a characteristic. So I've really tried to watch those and emulate some of those traits and bring them into my own game as much as possible. And my wife, Katie, she'd be the second person that I put in that category because she has all of those same leadership traits. So I live with someone that lives those values, and I really have tried to take some of these things into the way that I act.
She holds you to task, huh?
Yes, for sure. But she's the ultimate in terms of having that kind of balanced game. And also both of them have a great. Both those two people, Katie and Bob, have a good balance, really good balance of EQ and IQ. And I think that's important if you're going to try and kind of go after the leadership angle of this industry as opposed to production. The lessons learned, I do think of this quote that Jerry Roundhorse said to me on my first day at Opus, because it's something that I believe to be true, but I don't even know, Bill, how I ended up in his office on that first day. I'm sure it was a mistake. He said, sit down here and let me tell you something. And he said, all those developers that you're sitting with up on that floor or down on that floor, I can't remember. He said all of them can identify 10 issues on a deal, But the ones that I keep around are the ones that can identify the top 3 issues that make the other 7 issues moot. And I really think there's something to that. And what he was saying is you have to be able to identify and prioritize the big issues in running a business or the big issues on a deal. And you have to tackle those first. If you try and tackle all 10, you're going to lose yourself. And if you concentrate on the wrong 7, it's not going to matter because you didn't hit the first 3. I think that is sound advice. And I've tried to think about that my whole career. Another one that I can't help, but I think it really matters is I think it's okay to obsess over people and to obsess over personnel decisions. They're really hard. And some days you're going to make somebody's day and some days you're going to break them. But getting geared up for having the conviction to have a really hard conversation with somebody and to make a really tough call is tough. And I think one of the ways to deal with that is to obsess over it. I think it's okay to have some sleepless nights if you're having a really tough conversation coming up, because it makes you more authentic, makes you more human, makes you more prepared to show that conviction. So even though I obsess over personnel decisions and it eats me up because I think I'm a wicked combination of sensitive and tough, I hope I never lose that in these positions. And then the third thing, in just thinking about this part of the conversation, that I've learned is to really trust the numbers and trust brains as it relates to investment decisions. But with people, I think you have to trust your gut. So those would be some lessons learned.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you would remember being in Jerry Roundhorse's office, so early in your career. Obviously, that made a huge impact. Yeah, and obsessing around people decisions, Danny, shows you care, and they're not easy, but at the end of the day, my experience is that even though they can be tough decisions and tough conversations, at the end of the day, it's probably the right thing for everybody. It's just the pain of having to go through those, whatever they might yield, for sure.
Yeah. So and Bill, the more you've been through this, I think the more you do that, and unfortunately, I've been through that a lot. It's funny how more often than not, you ended up really doing that person a favor by being honest about where things are at and where you think things need to go. Right. I'd like to say that I've maintained a lot of friends over the years outside the company now, even after some tough conversations, because of that transparent moment. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting in this day and age of technology, and I've learned this lesson the hard ways. But if I did have to send, for instance, an email, and my initial reaction was to do this, and send it off. I've learned, and I've always counseled people, to your point, sleep on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wake up in the morning, you're refreshed, and say, okay, is this the message I wanted to give, or is this a message I should even give?
Yeah.
Over, email or by text or whatever, or should I really talk to that person face to face and discuss what obviously is an emotional subject for sure. So it's. I think it's a characteristic of great leadership. Eventually, you got to make the decisions.
Yeah.
But to obsess about doing the right thing it's just respectful, I think.
Yeah. I think that's well said. And there's also a lot of power in saying to someone, I might be wrong, but I believe I've done my homework and I've got my reasons and I want to talk to you about them. But I've got to make a call. And I've got to do what I think is right for you and for the company. There's a lot of power in that kind of thing. But it's a big part of what we do in these positions. And in this day and age with talent and the need to attract it and retain it, I think that issue of performance management, transparency, paying attention to people's career paths, and having tough conversations, massively important
Yeah.
in this business.
I would totally agree. I mean, if you express vulnerability, as a leader, which you just did, say, you know what, I might be wrong. It's a wonderful way to open up the conversation versus, going into a conversation saying, you know what, I'm right. This is my decision. Not going to listen to any conversation, whatever. But it does show the way you're wired and really how much you respect the other person in whatever way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I agree.
Sure.
Last thing on this point, I also think that some people fall victim to trying to prepare their script or their reasons, and they pick ticky tack kind of BS stuff, through a performance review. And many times it wasn't even stated to the individual before you're having the conversation. I don't think that works. Right. I think it has to be way more of this is my own analysis of the situation, and here's where we are. But we could probably talk about this all day.
Yeah. So Danny, last question, and you've been terrific, by the way. So thank you for taking the time. You're a young guy, you got a long track record ahead of you, but I'd be interested in doing the fast forward and saying, as you look back on your career, what do you want your legacy to be?
It's a great question. I'm 52. I'm not that, but I do want to be around for a long time in this industry. I thought about this question. Three things come to mind. Number one is, I do want to be known as someone where I treated people the way that I want to be treated. And going back to the conversation we just had, I need to be constantly ready for people to have the hard conversation with me about things I did wrong, where I made a bad judgment call, etc. But I really want to be, I would love to be known as someone that treated others the way that I expect to be treated. Number two, I would love to be known for someone who, whether it was at Opus or CBRE and all these different roles that I've had the opportunity to take on, I gave everything I had to try and move the first down chains, to use an American football term, to move the first down chains forward in every spot that I was in. So maybe that's the concept of leave it better than you found it. I hope that when people look back, they would say that I did that, or I tried to do that in every part that I touched to move it forward. And then third, and this might be most important, I want the legacy to be that I was direct and authentic.
Now that's a powerful legacy, and all, I think, very meaningful. Those of us who have studied leadership our whole life.
Not to put you on the spot, but what about yours?
And it ties into my last question for you for sure. But as you can see behind me, you can't see the total, kind of verbiage. But on my tagline on my email, I said leadership's all about integrity, humility, and generosity. Yeah. And I firmly believe that. It's kind of an odd combination of nouns, or adjectives, I guess, or whatever they are. But I really believe that is really what personifies great leaders. And, you and I are good friends. I know you're very philanthropically oriented. I'm just curious to have the audience hear about some of the things that you've got conviction around.
Yeah. Well, I want to get better at this, much better at this as the years go on, and Katie and I are able to devote more time and energy and financially to more causes. So I've got there's a long way to go for us on that, and so we plan to do more. But I'm still very close to the high school that I went to, Bill. If you can believe that, I went to a military academy in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I serve on the board there, and it's a little thing, but it's a big deal for me because of kind of the formative years that I spent there. So I'm still quite heavily involved in that. But we've got some favorite horse shelters. Katie and I are not horse people, but We got horse shelters, dog shelters. So things involved with animals are a big thing for us. And certain things in the environment, especially here in Denver, different things that we use, we're contributors to those efforts. Again, I want to be better in this regard, and many people that I work with and I'm around are more philanthropic than we are. It's not because we don't want to. We just need a bit more time to get into that as we get older. And I'm also trying to spend a lot of time with my daughters who are 20 and 18 and Katie. So it's an interest to get better at it, but those are some of the passions.
Well, in your defense, Danny, clearly I've got 16 years on you.
Yeah.
And like you, I spent most of my time on the business and on my family.
Yeah.
Now, having segued into a chairmanship role, as you know, I've started a foundation, which I'm hugely passionate about, that enhancing diversity across the industry for sure. But, there's a time and place for everything.
Yeah. And
I think good leaders, and I'm not putting myself in the same category as you and others, but, there's only so much you can do well. For sure. And I think there comes a point in time, and there will be a point in time. I know who you are. I know what you're like at your core, and there will be a time to do that, for sure. But you've got the DNA, obviously, to do that at the right point in time.
Thank you for that, Bill. And I envy what you have done, and I have every intention of improving in that regard.
Yeah. So Danny, that wraps it up, buddy. This has been terrific. I really appreciate you taking the time and good content, and just it'll be terrific.